Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the books that I've been reading this week. Booker season is still sort of a bit upon me in that sense. I'm almost at the end of reading the long list, so there'll be, I think, one in this one, but then shortly I'll be reading things that aren't that mostly, although also probably former Booker winners and also Wainwright Prize and Polari Prize stuff. So really the fun never stops. But anyway, let's get on with talking about the books that I've read this week. First up, a book I really greatly enjoyed, and that's Pageboy by Elliot Page. So the actor who sort of very publicly transitioned sort of a few years back. This is Elliot Page's memoir, kind of really talking a lot about his life growing up and how he came to where he is now. And I think what's really interesting for kind of a lot of what, you know, the criticism that is levelled often at trans folk, but particularly that was levelled at Elliot Page quite early on, was that this sort of, you know, this had come out of nowhere for him. And actually reading his memoir, you see just how much this had been a really regular part of his life all the way through. And so I think it's a really beautifully written memoir, I think. Incredibly tough reading at times, talking about a lot around abuse and stalking and so many other things. But I think what's also really beautiful about it is there are moments of joy in this book. There is just also some really gorgeous writing where the way Elliot Page talks about his experiences of having grown up and sort of his early acting jobs and various other things, I just thought was really quite special and really quite profound. So I just really greatly enjoyed this as a memoir. I think there's something so special about it when memoirs are really truly candid and don't always show themselves, you know, in the best light. And I think Elliot Page does that by, you know, he really digs into some of the less pleasant parts of his life and also where he's not been always the best. But I think it's a really well done book, definitely. Next up, I read Home Is Not a Place by Roger Robinson and Jonny Pitts, both of whom are writers who I've loved work of separately. So Roger Robinson is a poet and wrote a really incredible book of poetry about, among other things, Grenfell Tower and that tragedy, but sort of really focused on so many other things. And Jonny Pitts is mostly known for his book Afropean, which looked at sort of African diaspora within Europe, in sort of various places, and was really beautiful. It was sort of told in a very photographic style, and so actually in some ways this works. I don't think I'd realised that Jonny Pitts, as well as everything else, is a photographer. And so we've got all of these beautiful photos all the way through of various parts of essentially sort of Black and Afro-Caribbean life in the UK especially, and they're coupled with poems by Roger Robinson talking about identity, talking about, again, yeah, moments of joy, moments of tragedy, and I think it's so beautifully and compellingly done as this sort of collection, and it's one of those books that I put as a as a reservation from the library several months ago, based on Roz over at Scally Dandling Around the Books, from her recommendation, because she really loved this, and I absolutely see why. I think it's a real gem. I think it's just so beautifully done, and I think it's just a fun experience just to sort of see these beautiful vivid pictures. Some are a bit more candid, some are a bit more posed, and to have them alongside this poetry from Roger Robinson. Next up, within my Booker reading, I read Elaine Feeney's How to Build a Boat. And I won't go into tons of detail here because I've got a separate review that I filmed, of sort of a solo review of just this book. I had mixed feelings, I think, is the sort of the shorthand version of this. I think I found parts of this really beautiful and vivid in how dreamlike it was. I think I found other parts of it a little bit, it just didn't really gel for me. But the overall story is of a young boy called Jamie who is at school. He's sort of taunted by some of the other kids because he's quite different in many ways. He sort of is almost this, he just is a real outcast in many ways. And he is trying to sort of fulfill a project and sort of building this boat / perpetual motion machine in order to sort of some ways reach across and find some kind of form of connection with his mother, who has recently died. And so this book kind of carries quite a lot of that throughout it. And I think it's really quite beautiful in some passages in really talking about the power of loss and how it's so big and inconceivable that we, of course, would do things like these giant, ridiculous projects to create a perpetual motion machine in order to bring them back. Like, of course, because what else do we have? You know, grief is something that can be so powerless. It can leave us feeling so powerless. And so for a young boy, what does he have, you know, at his disposal? He can do something, and that something can feel like it gives hope. So I thought there's some real beauty in that. I think I just struggled overall a bit with some parts of the execution personally. I see why people love it. For me, it just occasionally, I don't know, I just kind of needed it to feel a bit tighter for me personally. But yeah, still overall a really enjoyable book. I still raced through this. I still read it pretty quickly, actually. I sort of was absorbed in the story itself. I just didn't necessarily... I don't know, it didn't go for the jugular in the way that I kind of wanted it to. But other opinions may vary on this, so there we go. I read quite a few other books for the Polari and Wainwright prizes as well. I won't go into all of them here because there are quite a few, and a fair few of them are fairly short. And I think I'm also still sort of letting my thoughts bubble on a few of them as well. But the Polari Prize is a prize for LGBT writing, and the Wainwright Prize is a prize for nature writing. And between the two, I've read some really interesting books that I loved. So let's start with the Polari, because I mentioned it first. And one that I really thought was very special was Some Integrity by Padraig Regan. And this is a collection of poems, although the interesting thing in many ways is that the middle part of this collection rather, is basically two big essays in, not necessarily in poetic form in that sense, sort of free verse. But ostensibly this poetry collection really looks at particularly things around food and nature, and linking that to the body or to sex or to whatever else. And really quite beautiful, sensuous and sensual poems as well. But then it also does some quite interesting things in sort of kind of pulling the rug from underneath you. So there'll be these very sensual poems, and then suddenly he'll cut in with something about the Pulse shooting in Orlando, and about the kind of drawing a line between the places and the things that we see as being ours and being safe, and that being taken away from you. There's also something that I wasn't really expecting at all. There's also at one point a reference to glitches in the Pokemon games that is somehow done beautifully to kind of link again to the Pulse shooting. Kind of wild, and I don't really know how he does it or pulls it off, but I found this really captivating and really daring and exciting in a way that I just had not expected at all. So I thought this was a really powerful collection. I'd kind of urge you to take a look at if you can find it. I found mine on Scribd. Link below, but also that sort of was an easy place for me to find it. I'm sure it must also exist in good bookshops, but it was just sort of a weird meeting of worlds to see somebody reference the Pokemon video game series in a poetry collection as part of an LGBT book prize. That is a very happy place for Bob. So there we go. Then I read Beastly, A New History of Animals and Us by Keggie Carew. This is for the Wainwright Prize. And this is a non-fiction book that really delves into a lot around how we view creatures and other animals as humans. So how humans often will do that thing of sort of being like, wow, look at this bird, it can use this tool, isn't it clever? And actually we're judging it by entirely the wrong set of intelligence. We're judging it by how well it can approximate the intelligence of a human, as opposed to how well it is able to survive and do its thing. And so this book explores quite a lot about that, but also really looks at this kind of primal nature of animals and humans and all of these other things. I just found this really captivating as a book. I thought it was so cleverly done to really focus on this sort of, what's the sort of the wildness of creatures, including humans. What do they have to tell us about themselves, about us, all of these sorts of things. I just thought it was so cleverly researched, but also just so engaging as a read. It didn't feel like a dense non-fiction book kind of hitting you over the head with facts. It was very narratively done. It was very interesting and engaging and fun. I just had fun with it. I think that's the word for this book. It was just full of these really interesting stories about various things that creatures do and the ways that we as humans seek to find neat categories to put these creatures in and to see ourselves as being so wholly separate from them all. I just thought it was a very fun book to kind of read and enjoy. And on a very similar note, and for the same prize shortlist, Black Ops and Beaver Bombings, Adventures with Britain's, I've just lost the title of this book, with Britain's Wild Mammals by Fiona Mathews and Tim Kendall. And so this book is mostly, I mean, it focuses, as the title says, on wild mammals. And so we get a lot in this book about pine martens and beavers and those sorts of creatures. And I think what's really, I mean, right from the jump, this book is out to just have fun. This book has that very, I'd probably say very British sense of humour in some ways, but very kind of absurdist sense of humour that is full of, you know, the book starts with people wading around in a bit of a stream looking for the feces of beavers in order to test them, and the sort of the amount of eye rolling from the book itself, sort of being like, yeah, we're out here again doing this, can't wait, is sort of just really fun. For a book that's you know, I mean, it's not like a short book, it's not super long, but for a book that's like fairly sizable, it really went by pretty quickly for me. I listened to this as an audiobook, and I just had, again, a lot of fun with just listening to somebody tell me the story about the kind of absurdity of rummaging around trying to do this, or, you know, trying to pin down a weasel in order to do a sort of throat swab of it to be able to check local population health, you know, all that kind of jazz. And the way to do that is to basically give them a Pringles tube, because they'll dive headfirst into it thinking it's going to keep them safe and hidden, and, you know, sort of, if I can't see you, you can't see me kind of thing. And then the sort of the scientist or tester picking them up by their tail, sort of, and then sort of using a throat swab. I'm probably not doing this book justice, but it's a really, it was telling you a lot of kind of very important and very useful and informative things. This book is just also a lot of fun. You can tell that the writers love their subject matter and are just relentlessly nerdy and joyful about it. And I think that's something really very special as well. So I just really greatly enjoyed it. And that brings me to the end. There are a few other books I read this week that I won't sort of hit you over the head with, because there were quite a few. I've had a fairly productive reading week, but also because some of them will appear in other various prize listing things, and I didn't want this to be, here's a book and 3 Wainwright books and 5 Polari books and whatever else, you know. But I hope you are having a good week. I hope you've had a good reading week as well. Take care, and speak to you all very soon. Bye-bye.